皆さんは73歳の被爆者が来ると言ってどんな人を想像しましたか？元気そうに見えますか？
When you hear a 73-year-old Hibakusha, were you able to imagine somebody like me?
でもね、ありがとう、Thank you very much 6歳と10ヶ月の時にキノコ雲の下にいて被爆しました。
However, when I was 6 years and 10 months, I was right underneath that big mushroom bomb that you've seen often.
やけどをして放射線も受けましたので死にかけましたけれど、でもその過去の悲惨な話は忘れて生きようと決めていました。
And obviously I was burnt, severely burnt, and also affected by the radiation. But I made a decision to continue life in a more positive way.
子供にも自分の体験を長い間話しませんでした。
For many years, I never even told my own children of my experiences.
しかし目は飛行機を見てたんですね。エノラゲを見て目を直接焼いたので今手術をしてますね。膝も手術してます。だけど話はしたことがありませんでした。
However, I can tell you that I was looking up at the sky at the airplane, the Enola Gay, and so my eyes were directly affected. And still to this day, I'm still going under surgery for that issue. I also have bad knees, but still yet, all these experiences that I've had, I never really gave any testimonies until recently.
やけどの後も薄くなりました。しかし心の傷はね、もうずっと一緒。
My burns, my scars have become lighter and lighter, but the scars within my heart continue to linger on.
しかし私は幸いなことに工芸家でエナメルミュラルアートをやります。だからそこで自分の心をメッセージとして入れて自分自身を癒してきました。
However, fortunately for me, I'm an artist. I'm an enamel artist, and so I'm able to put my pain and all my feelings into my art, my message into my art, and that helps me to heal.
だからその作品には一見はっきりとしたメッセージは見えません。だけど皆さんは感性が素晴らしい若い人ですからここから何かを想像して出さるといいと思います。それで後でこれをまた回してみてください。
I'd like to show you some photographs of my work a little bit later on. When you first look at my work, you may not be able to see the messages because they are not direct. But because you are such a young generation and obviously bright and probably have great imaginations, I'm confident that you'll be able to capture some of my messages within my work.
1945年8月の6日8時15分私は小学校の1年で学校へ行く途中でした。
In 1945, August 6, 1945, at 8:15 a.m. in the morning, I was in the first grade of elementary school on my way to school.
で 2.3 キロ爆心地から離れたところでした。
学校が
歩いているところで。
Where I was walking was about 2.3 kilometers away from the central area where the bomb was dropped.
でアメリカの飛行機の B-29 が来たという声がしたので私は思わず空を見上げました。
And I heard the voices, there's a B-29, the American bomber up in the sky, and so I looked up.
そうすると突然強烈な光が襲ってきました。
And in that instant, a powerful ray of light hit us all.
とっさに右腕で顔を隠したので右腕と頭とそして左の首にやけどをしました。
And so I immediately covered my eyes with my right arm. So the skin on my right arm, the top of my head, and the left side of my neck were all burnt.
しかし最初何が起こったのか分かりませんでした。
However, ourselves, we had no idea what had happened.
そのうちに、周りが闇夜のように真っ黒になりました。それは爆風で舞い上がった砂ぼこりですね。そしてそれが闇夜のように太陽を隠したのです。
And then right after that instant, everything became pitch black and dark. And what that was the force of wind had created such an upheaval with the dirt and the dust that it covered the sun.
で遠くから見るとそれはキノコ雲に見えたはずです。
And that is probably what was actually the mushroom, the bomb mushroom that you see from afar.
で砂ぼこりが口の中に入ってジャリジャリとしてその感覚を今でも覚えています。
I still remember to this day when all the grit of the dust and the sand within my mouth.
今考えたらそれで体内に被爆をしていると思います。
And I truly believe, thinking back now, that that is part of how I became radiated within my body.
そのうち強烈な痛みがやってきたので泣きながら家に帰りました。
And then gradually I started feeling extreme pain all over my body, and so I was in tears, crying and running home.
家はめちゃめちゃに壊れていました。しかし幸いにも母は無事でした。
Our home was completely destroyed, but fortunately my mother was still there and safe.
破れた天井から青空が見えてました。その時は。
And because the roof was completely demolished and gone, we could see the blue sky from within our house.
で私は腕が痛いのにその空をとても美しいと思ったんですね。それでそれが私に勇気を与えて今その元気でいれるんだと思っています。
And even though I was in excruciating pain at that moment, I remember to this day and believe that this is what helped me get through to this day with a positive mind, is that looking at that blue sky helped to alleviate a little bit of the pain, and I remember thinking how beautiful it was.
で母は私を見ても自分の子供だって気がつかなかったんですね。
However, back to my mother, the minute that she saw me, she couldn't even recognize her own daughter.
あまり髪の毛は焼けてジリジリになってました。そして手足は真っ黒ですね。それから爆風で飛ばされたので洋服は破れていました。だから自分の子供と見えなかったですね。
My hair was scorched, sizzling and scorched. My skin was obviously really black and dark from all of the dust and debris. Because of the extreme force of the wind and the heat, my clothing was all in rags. So there was no way for my mother to realize that I was her own daughter.
しばらくして多くの人が瀕死の状態で家の前をずっと逃げて通っていきました。
After a moment of time, we noticed a lot of people coming towards our home after they had been affected.
でほとんどの人は服が焼けて裸状態で、彼らは自分の肩から向けた自分自身の皮膚を指の先にぶら下げて手を前に出してまるで幽霊のようでした。
It was almost as if they looked like zombies or ghoulies walking, well, trying to run, but they were walking. They were so scorched and burnt, and the skin on their body was melting. And we could, while we were watching them and they were walking in this kind of an array, the skin and the meat from their body was drooping from the tips of their fingers.
皆さんはトマトの湯むきっていうのをしたことがありますか？人間の体にもそれが起こるんですね。
If any of you cook and know about how you boil a tomato to get the skin off quicker, the same thing happens with the human body.
でしかし彼らは力尽きて家の前の道端に倒れてどんどん死んでいきました。
So there were so many of these people that kept walking or trying to run away towards our home, but they would drop, dying one after another.
私の20代の若いおばもその朝出かけたまま死にました。
My aunt, who was in her 20s, she also had left early that morning and never returned.
おじ一家の赤ちゃんを含む6人も全員死にました。赤ちゃんを含む6人の家族ですね。
And my aunt and her husband, my uncle, and also 6 children, they all died.
実は私はその日の6日前まで爆心地のわずか500メートルのところに家があったんです。
The ironic thing is that 6 days before the atomic bomb had dropped, I was living in a house that was only 500 Metro? Oh, goodness. Yeah, 500 meters, which is right there from the central area where the bomb was dropped.
だからそこに住んでいた友達や学校のクラスメートは全員死にました。
So all of my really close friends that still live there, and many of my classmates were still there. Of course, they didn't make it.
広島では14万人が同時に死に、先ほど聞いたように長崎では7万人死にました。
And as you heard earlier from Kathleen, in Hiroshima, 140,000 people. In Nagasaki, 70,000 people died instantaneously.
しかしそれでは済まないんですね。生き残った人も次の世代も放射能の影響で苦しむことになりました。
But what I'd like you to know is that wasn't the end of it. For generations and generations, because of the radiation, they've been infected on a genetic level.
その夜から私は高熱が出て意識がなくなりました。
That night, I had a very, very high fever and lost consciousness.
病院も焼けてお医者さんも全部死んでしまったので治療が受けられません。だから母は私がもう死ぬと覚悟してたそうです。
And all the hospitals that were nearby had burnt down to the ground and were demolished, and there were no doctors or nurses to help me. So my mother was certain that I was going to die.
音楽や詩を愛する優しい父はその時国家の命令で兵隊に留守でした。
My father, who loved music and art, had been called away by the government and was serving his duty as a soldier away from town.
で私が奇跡的に命を取り留めて初めて気がついたのは耐え難い本当にすごい悪臭でした。街を覆っていました。
But when I did actually miraculously regain consciousness, the first thing that I recall was the awful stench that was flowing through the town.
膨大な数の死体を焼いてたんですね。
And the reason was because all of the bodies of the people that had died were being cremated.
で遠くの町から来てその焼くことを作業を手伝った人たちも健康だったのに後で残留放射能というのを浴びて今もがんで死に続けています。
Another scary fact about the effects of radiation is that during that time, people that were not there during the atomic bomb dropping or were not there in the immediate vicinity that came to volunteer and help cremate these bodies, they became affected, and many of them are still suffering from cancer today.
その当時は放射能のことを誰も知りません。だからやけどや怪我のない人がどんどん死んでいくのでみんななんでだろうと不思議に思いました。そして怖かったですね。
Of course, at that time, nobody knew about the nuclear bomb or radiation or any of those facts. Nobody had any idea what was going on. But people were dying. They didn't look like anything was wrong with them. They were being killed from the inside out. But nobody knew what to do or why they were dying like that.
皆さんは折り鶴の貞子のことを知ってますか？
Does anybody know about Sadako and the 1,000 cranes? Yes? Some of you do?
彼女は私の同じ中学校の4歳年下の生徒でした。
She was just 4 years younger than me in this same series of schools.
彼女は2歳の時に原爆を受けて体は無傷だったのに12歳で病気を発動して亡くなりました。
She was affected at the age of 2. 何歳の時
？2歳の時に受けて、その後12歳に病気で亡くなりました。
And although there was nothing visually wrong with her, she died at the age of 12.
放射能はその時も何千人というそういう同じような病気を作りました。
That was the type of illness, if that's a good way to say it, that was developed from the radiations, and people died. Thousands and thousands of people died in this way.
で原爆で直接ラジエーションを受けた人は妊婦さんが奇形児をたくさん産みました。
Many of the people that were actually affected directly by the radiation, especially those that were pregnant at the time, wound up giving birth to mutated children.
でそして私の場合は10代の初めから影響が出ました。
And then I was fine for many years, but then in my teens, the effects started to show.
で喉のあたりが腫れて、そして口の中に出来物や外の唇とかにできて、ご飯を飲み込むことも難しいくらいです。白血球に異常があったんですね。
Oh goodness. My throat started to swell. The glands in my mouth were affected. I had sores all over my lips, and it was very hard for me to have a sense of taste.
もちろん目や骨の膝のね骨、足の骨も割れてしょっちゅう骨折をしました。
Needless to say, of course, my eyes and my knees and my bones were all affected, and so I sprained myself many, many times.
で2世の影響を言いますと、私のやはり同じ被爆者の妹の子どもたちは3人が甲状腺を患っています。
Speaking of second generation Hibakusha, those that were not there at that time but were later born, for example, my younger sister, her children, they had problems with their oh goodness.
Thyroid.
Thyroid, thank you. Yeah, I couldn't think of the word. Thyroid.
そして1人は20代でがんの手術、甲状腺がんの手術します。
And so one of the children at the age of 20 had to have surgery for thyroid cancer.
そして私の2番目の子供には胸の骨の異常があります。だけど他の兄弟とかもう親子全然健康な一家です。しかし胸の異常が出ました。そのことで息子は学校でいじめられて、将来とても親とても悲しい思いをしました。
And speaking personally, my second child, my second son, has issues with his chest bones. So he's been suffering with this most of his life. But nobody else in my family has any other health issues. We're a very healthy family otherwise. But my son has suffered and been mentally in pain for many, many years.
医師はそれを原爆のせいだとは認めないです。だけどあまりに多いのでですね、もう数値的にとてもそれは被害だと実験をしています。
And although the doctors refuse to acknowledge that this is the effects of the atomic bomb and the radiation, I believe that there are so many cases of this that the numbers just cannot lie. It has to be effect of the atomic bomb and the radiation.
しかし終戦後原爆の後でアメリカは政府は6年間原爆の被害放射線の被害はなかったということに決めてました。それで話すことはタブーとなりました。被爆の状況、放射線の影響を話すことはダメだということになったので、日本政府もそれに同調しました。
Whether you know or not, the U.S. government, for 6 years after what had happened, that terrible incident had happened, had refused to say that there were any effects of radiation, that nothing happened. Even the Japanese government were forced to keep everything quiet and not talk about it.
その頃から原子力の政策が始まったんですね。
And that's about the time that the nuclear power plants were coming into fruition, where they started creating nuclear power plants.
だから被害を話すことはとても都合が悪かったわけです。
And that is probably the main reason why they were not allowed to talk about this.
被爆者も話したところでちっとも自分に利益があるわけではなく悲しい思いを思い出すだけなので話さなくなりました。
And also for the Hibakusha, nothing good came of them talking about their experiences. It was such a painful experience that they wanted to forget about it. So eventually, nobody talked about it.
で結婚する時でも相手の人が被爆者だと ちょっとね血管ためらったで差別があったんですね。
And then later on in the years, there were things such as discrimination against those that were that experienced the radiation. That when they were trying to get married, they couldn't even talk about it. They would hide it from other people.
そしてその結果地震の頻発する国土に狭い国土に54基もの原発を作ってしまいました。日本のですね。
And then eventually, within this tiny little country of Japan that has so many earthquakes, we wound up creating 54 nuclear power plants.
そして3月11日、昨年ですが、福島の皆さんが知っている大事故が起きました。
And then in March 11th, as many of you know, the awful accident of Fukushima power plant occurred.
で世界で最初に被爆してその放射線の恐ろしさを一番知っている広島の被爆者はとても責任を感じてますね。
For those of us Hibakusha from Hiroshima who were the first to become Hibakusha, that were the first that had to experience this, we feel a huge responsibility about what has happened in Fukushima.
で兵器と電力を作るプラントは違うではないかという人もいます。しかし被爆者を両方とも同じように作るんですね。
And then although many people believe that the plants that create nuclear power versus the plants that create nuclear weapons are different, they still both create the same hibakusha.
で日本のは原爆にもスリーマイルアイランド事故にもチェルノブイリにも学ばないで自分の国で今も被爆者を作り続けているんですね。
And I'm sad to say that Japan didn't learn from the 3 Mile Island incident. They didn't learn from the Chernobyl incident, and we're continuing to create hibakusha in our own country.
一般市民はあまりに勉強していなかったと思うんですね。それで私は勉強の必要を感じて先月ウクライナのチェルノブイリへ行きました。
I believe that most of us in the general public in Japan never educated ourselves enough to understand the devastation of the effects that a nuclear power plant could cause. And because I believe in that so strongly, I recently went to Chernobyl to educate myself even further.
26年前、そこで何が起こって何が今も続いているのかマスコミではなくて自分の目で見る必要を感じたからです。
I wanted to feel and I wanted to see with my own eyes what had actually happened 26 years ago in Chernobyl and also what is still continuing to happen today.
そうするとメディアで言っていないことがやはり続いていました。
And as I had suspected, many things that the media has not picked up, that is not being reported, is still continuing today.
でその原子炉の、コンクリートで覆ってますけどまだ漏れ続けてますね。
And even though their nuclear power plant is coated with concrete, the radiation is still seeping out.
でその廃炉にするために働いている人が今も4000人高い放射能の中で働いています。
To this day, there are still 4,000 people working there with high levels of radiation to try to cover up this power plant.
そして日本では30キロの人を疎開させましたがあちらでは280キロ隣の国のベラルーシという国まで及んで退避させていました。
Comparing what happened to Japan, for Japan, the people were evacuated 30 kilometers away from the central area of the nuclear power plant in Fukushima. Well, in Chernobyl, they were evacuated 280 kilometers to another country in Belarus.
で日本の原発はたまたま今定期点検のために全部止まっています。5月5日に止まりました。 3日目です。はい。
Oh, okay. On May 5th, a few days back, they just stopped all the nuclear power plants for testing and evaluation.
それで国民からはもう再稼働をさせないで止めてください、自然エネルギーに変えてくださいっていう希望が出てます。
And of course, with this opportunity, the general public now being a little more educated are rising up and asking the government to not turn them back on, to change to natural energy.
しかし一部の人は経済のためにもう一度再開したいと思っています。
But of course, there is a percentage of people that want to turn back on the power plants for economical, financial reasons and gain.
最近のニュースで聞いたのですが、サッカーボールが東北の災害津波で流されて2000キロ離れたアラスカに到着しました。つい最近ですね。
I just recently heard in the news that a soccer ball from the tsunami in Japan was actually recovered. Was recovered recently in Alaska.
そしてカナダにはオートバイがコンテナのまま漂着します。つい先週ぐらいです。
And about a couple weeks ago in Canada, a motorcycle that's still inside of a container reached Canada from Japan.
それでですね、世界の海が一回放射能を流すと汚れます。
And so we all need to be aware that once the radiation is in the ocean, it's radiated.
平和な世界っていうのは爆弾も放射線も空から襲ってこない、若い人の上に青空がずっと広がっていることだと思うんですね。
I truly believe that a peaceful world is when we have a world of blue skies smiling down at all of the younger generation where there are no nuclear weapons in the sky or nuclear energy coming out of the land.
で、皆さんがこの思いを共有してエネルギーの浪費を抑え、そうですね、愛と平和の輪をできるところから小さくてもいいからできるところから広げていけば核のない世界は来ると信じています。ありがとう。
And I would just like to share with you what I believe and what is my hope is that if all of us, including all of you, if we take just a little role, we can start with just a tiny little role of perhaps cutting down on the energy that we use, then I believe that it will cause a chain reaction where we will actually reach a world of love and peace as a big circle.
でもう時間がないので、もし見たい人は急いでます。
And we ran out of time, but if you have the chance and you're interested, please have a look at my art.
Okay, thank you very much.
Was it 70,000 people that died in tsunami?
In Nagasaki. That was at Nagasaki alone.
Which one of the two cities did she live in?
Nagasaki to Hiroshima.
Hiroshima.
Did your parents experience any medical problems?
母はですね、トイレに入っていて無事でしたね。家が潰れたのにトイレットで入って。
It was a miracle. My mother was in the toilet at the moment, at that moment. So
narrow place.
it was a really tiny, narrow place, and the house was destroyed, but she was fine.
日本にはね、トイレに神様がいますって歌があります。で、それを思い出しますね。
We have a song in Japan that there's a God in our toilets, and so I remember that song.
Beautiful woman. 美しい女神がいる。
Oh, it's about a beautiful God, a goddess.
それで掃除をする人は美人になって、ハンサムになるという。
And that leads to saying that all women that clean their toilets will become beautiful, beautiful in their future years. There's a song like that in Japan.
父はね、 戦争に行って、
Yeah, my father was at war, so
無事に帰ってき
but he came back unaffected.
た。でも彼は少しねショックを受けて終戦でね、それでもう病気になってしまって働けなかったですね。
But after he came back, after my mother came back from, my father came back from the war, although he wasn't affected by the radiation, he was mentally affected from the war, and he became ill and was unable to work thereafter at all. By the way, the photographs, they look small, but all of the pieces are pretty big. The average is about the size of a door.
ガラスをメタル、ガラスをメタルの上にやって。
And it's a glass that's cooked onto metal. Enamel.
そうですね。ステンドグラスは金属が下にないんですね。
Stained glass doesn't have metal underneath it, so it's similar, but it's not.
Yes. Is the materials that you use to create your art similar to how you feel the process was? Like, is there a reason why the cooking the glass onto the metal is something that
私が素材の話もあるんですけど、それはやっぱり体験したその感じで生まれた素材。
もうそれしかないですね。
That's all I have. Yes, that's all it is. That's everything.
もしそれがなかったらね、エナメリスなかった。
I believe that if I hadn't experienced that, I would have never became an enamel artist.
right.
What was the first thing that she did as soon as she covered her eyes with her right arm?
右腕で目をすぐしたと言いましたけど、その一番最初にその後やったことは何ですか？
その後ですか、やけどした後。家の前によその家があって、そこへ飛び込んでたんです。そうするとまだ水道が止まる前だったので水をかけたんです。それが良かったかもしれない。
I immediately jumped into somebody's house that was right in front of me, and it was before the water stopped. So I splashed water on myself. I guess it was a natural reaction, and it might have been fortunate for me that I had done that.
今でもお医者さんはね、最初に冷やしますね。だから子供でしたナチュラルな、ね、感覚でしたんですね。
Yeah, even today, when somebody's affected by being burned or something, the first thing a doctor does is chill the burn, and so perhaps that was a natural instinct of mine, even though I was a child to do.
だからやけどね、そこに巻きとかったけど、半年ぐらいで治りました。
So although it was severe burns, for me I was a fortunate one. It was gone after 6 months.
髪はアフロヘアでしたけど。
Although my hair was an afro.
Looking good.
She says I look good.
But 焦げてました。もう綺麗に生え変わりましたね。
But it grew back.
How long did it take for your hair to grow?
そうですね。それは私はちょっとあまりね、鏡を見せてもらえないので、あまり覚えてないけど、多分1年後には生えてたと思いますね。
I don't remember clearly because my mother wouldn't let me look at a mirror for a long time, but I think it was about a year.
あまりね見せたくなかったですね。
My mother just didn't want me to look at myself in the mirror for a while. 今でも水でだいぶもう少し軽くなって。 You have to look really closely, probably because she watered it down immediately, but there is still a little bit left over, just not as prominent as it was before. But when I was younger, I really didn't want to show any of my boyfriends my arms or anything.
Toshiko and Reiko, please come in as our honored guests. We only have a few minutes, so just very briefly describe Reiko's testimony so that the other students can hear, and you all very briefly describe Toshiko's. Arigato. Dozo.
So Reiko-san, she was in the 5th grade when the atomic bomb was dropped. And in the schools, they didn't really go to school to learn. They would learn about military techniques, like sort of like marching kind of things. And the older kids would go to work into the cities. So the day that the atomic bomb was dropped, she was in school. It was very hot, and there was a meeting outside on the field. So,
And it was a day in August.
yeah, so it was very, very hot. So they went out to the field, and while they were talking, they saw a plane. It was the 29er? Yeah, 29er. And it was common to see a plane fly around, an American plane. So they didn't really think much of it. But out on the field, all of a sudden, the sky turned black. And it was a bright, sunny day.
And then all of a sudden it started raining.
Pouring black rain.
And it was actually like black rain.
And it was very, very cold, like freezing cold, but it was a very hot day out in August. So it didn't make any sense. And I think she fell over.
Yeah, she fell over and then
Tumbled over, and then they went to go for coverage, to find coverage and to find shelter. And then after that it happened, they would all go back. They all tried to go back to their homes to find their families. And they had many people coming, scorched and just completely black, like you couldn't tell who they were. People screaming, crying. There was no food. She did find her family, most of her family, but their next door neighbor, there was 5 kids, and they were looking for their mother. And there was this person that came crawling, screaming, crying.
They thought it was actually a dog because
like a black dog, because she was
covered in black and she was crawling, but it turns out that it was their mother.
And then her sister was working because she was older too, and she came back and she had burns all over her back and her neck.
Her neck down to her back.
And then they didn't have any kind of medicine to treat them, so they didn't know what to do. So her mother actually ended up cutting cucumbers to help the wounds on her back, and her father was very badly wounded too.
Thank you so much, ladies.
Okay, well, she was 6 years old when this happened, and when she was around 400 kilometers from the center of the town, and she was walking. 2.3. Sorry. 2.3. Sorry. 2.3 kilometers, and then she was walking towards the center, and she saw a B-29. So all of a sudden, she saw like a bomb coming, and she saw a really bright light. So she covered her face with like her right arm. So what happened was she had burns on her arm, on the back of her neck.
Her hair was scorched.
Yeah, like sizzling. It was just, she was covered in black, and what she did was she ran to the nearest house, and she like put water on her skin to like cool her skin down. So yeah, that's.
And then from then on, she ran back home to find her house. It's totally almost destroyed. But luckily, her mother was still alive. She was in the toilet. She was in the toilet where it was really confined, and surprisingly, that area of the house was fine. So she came out to be okay. And her father happened to be serving in the military at the moment, and he was away from that area. So when he came back, he was surprised to see whatever happened. But yeah, so he wasn't affected by the radiation at all. But he was mentally ill from the war, so he was unable to do the things that he loved. And
Thank you very much.
さらば友よ旅立ちの時変わらないその想いよ今
We have a present for your school. These are 1,000 paper cranes made by students in Japan that we would like you to have in your school. So thank you very much. We also have, thanks to Toshiko, this is very, very special. These are the aogiri seeds. These seeds are coming from a tree that survived the bombing of Hiroshima. So you can plant these seeds and think of what we want to do to make a more peaceful world. So that is for, they have directions. They're brought to us by Toshiko from Hiroshima. And we received these paper cranes from the Hiroshima Peace Culture Foundation, so we're very happy to have an alliance with them. And this is more paper from Hiroshima Peace Culture Foundation for you to make your own set of 1,000 paper cranes. And this is a CD about Hiroshima and some of the survivors' testimony. And these are terms for you all to learn about disarmament, and particularly the disarmament forum at the United Nations, which we host the world headquarters here in New York City. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for listening, and we really, really hope that you all decide to use the life that has been given to you as a grand adventure to help the world become a better place. So thank you, and let's thank again.
Just say you're at a presentation, you'll be fine.
All right.
Okay.